The whole room applauded when the CFO thanked Mark for the analysis that saved our worst quarter in years. I applauded too. I was 3 rows back, clapping for a report I had written over 9 late nights on a model I had built from nothing in a file that still had my name inside it. For a while I told myself that was just how leadership talked. Managers present, teams build, credit rounds up to whoever stands at the front of the room. I'd worked there 11 years. I knew the rules. But that night, I opened the file again, not to check anything, just to reread my own work. And I stopped on the document properties. The created by field said my name. The date said 11 days before Mark had ever touched it. One line I thought, one field, probably a glitch. So I opened the version history. And that was the moment I stopped clapping in my head for good. What I found in there wasn't a glitch. It was a decision. His. Let me back up, because to understand why that field mattered, you have to understand what the report was. I'm a senior operations analyst. I've been at the same company for 11 years, long enough to remember 3 logos and 4 reorganizations, long enough that people stopped asking whether I knew where a number came from and started assuming I did. My job, stripped of its title, is simple. When something in the business stops making sense on paper, I'm the person they hand it to. That spring, the thing that stopped making sense was our coastal division. It was losing money faster than anyone upstairs wanted to admit, and the explanations kept contradicting each other. One week it was volume. The next week it was pricing. The week after that it was market conditions, which is the phrase leaders use when they don't have a real answer. The exec team gave us 10 days to come back with a recovery plan that the board would actually believe. I want to be honest about my manager, Mark Delgado, because the easy version of this story is a villain, and Mark was never that. He was good at the part one was bad at. He could stand in front of a room of vice presidents and make a slide feel inevitable. He knew which executives cared about margin and which ones cared about headcount, and which ones just wanted to look decisive. For years, that had felt like a partnership. I built the thing. Mark carried it up the stairs to the people who signed off on it. I told myself the stairs mattered as much as the thing. And for a long time, the partnership was real, or at least it looked real from where I stood. 2 years earlier, I'd untangled a billing error that had been quietly overcharging one of our largest clients. And when the client noticed before we did, it was Mark who walked into that room and absorbed the anger and walked out with the relationship intact. I couldn't have done that. I told myself we each did the half the other couldn't, and that the arrangement was fair because the work found its way to the right people either way. I never asked whose name was on it by the time it got there. It hadn't occurred to me that the name was the thing being negotiated. So I built the thing. I pulled 2 years of Coastal's transaction data, rebuilt the cost model line by line, and found what the market conditions story had been hiding, a pricing structure that quietly lost money on our 3 biggest accounts every time we won them. 9 late nights. I remember the nights specifically because I remember which ones my dinner came from the vending machine on the 4th floor. When it was done, it was clean. It showed exactly where the money went and exactly how to stop the bleeding without gutting the division. I sent Mark the finished deck at 11:40 on a Tuesday night with a 2-word message. It's done. He wrote back the next morning, "This is great work. I'll get it in front of the right people." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? That was the arrangement. 10 days later, the CFO stood at the front of an all-hands, put the Coastal recovery on the screen, and thanked Mark for his turnaround analysis. The room applauded. I applauded. And I noticed, the way you notice a draft in a room before you find the open window, that Mark, standing up there accepting it, never once said the word team. He never said my name. He said I looked at the data. He said what I found. I told myself it was nothing. The file told me otherwise. That first field created by my name, dated 11 days before Mark ever opened it, could have been an accident. Shared drives are messy. Templates get copied. A single piece of evidence is only ever a question, and the question it asked me was small and almost embarrassing. Had I misremembered how this came together? Was I about to make a fool of myself over metadata? I've learned since then that one document creates doubt. It takes more than one to create the truth. So I stopped trusting my memory and started trusting the record, because the record doesn't get flattered at all hands and it doesn't need anything from anybody. The version history was the record. Every save, every editor, every timestamp, going back to the first blank page. I opened it expecting to feel foolish. Instead, I felt very calm and very cold, the way you do when a suspicion you were ashamed of turns out to be correct. 47 revisions. 43 of them were mine, stacked across those 9 nights I remembered by their vending machine dinners. The model, the analysis, the recommendation, the narrative on every slide. Mine, time-stamped, undeniable. I didn't take the history at face value either. I cross-checked the save times against my own calendar, because I've learned that a timestamp only means something if you can tie it to a person and a place. The 1:14 a.m. save on the 9th was the night I'd texted my sister that I was still at the office. The Sunday afternoon revisions lined up with a building badge in I could have pulled if anyone ever asked. Every one of my 43 edits had a life around it that I could account for. Mark's 4 had nothing around them but the afternoon before he stood up to present. Mark's edits numbered 4. All 4 were from the afternoon before the presentation. 3 were cosmetic, a color change, the company logo, a font. The 4th was on the title slide. And when I opened the earlier version to see what he had changed, I understood that this was where the accident theory died. The original title slide, my version, the one I'd sent at 11:40 that Tuesday night, read in small gray letters at the bottom, prepared by, and then my name. Mark's edit, the afternoon before he presented, had deleted my name and replaced that line with prepared by operations leadership. A busy manager taking loose credit in a hallway. I could have forgiven. People round up. But you don't accidentally open a title slide, select a name, and type a department over it. That is not shorthand. That is a choice made by a specific person at a specific time about a specific name. Mine. And there was one more thing, sitting in my own sent folder the whole time, which I'd never had a reason to reread. My email to Mark at 11:40 p.m., it's done. His forward to the CFO the next morning at 7:15. My analysis of the coastal recovery, see attached. Not the team's. Not my analysts. Mine, he'd written about a thing he had not built, 7 hours after I sent it to him finished. There's a particular kind of vertigo in realizing that someone you trusted made a decision about you while you were asleep. I sat with that for a while. I did the thing I do best, the thing that had gotten me into this in the first place. I stopped feeling and started checking. Because if he had done it once, cleanly, without hesitation, I did not believe it was the first time. It wasn't. I went back through the shared drive, through 2 years of decks that Mark had presented to leadership and that everyone, including me, had filed under his name in our heads. It took an evening. 2 of them told the same story the Coastal File had. A distribution study Mark had authored for the operations VP was created under the name of a contractor who'd left the year before. And a vendor savings model, a good one, the kind of work that gets you noticed, had been created under the name Priya Raman. I knew Priya. She was a junior analyst 2 teams over, sharp, still young enough in her career to assume that when your work disappears into a leadership readout with someone else's name on it, that's just how the ladder works, and you should be grateful to be near it. I remembered months earlier her asking me in the break room, carefully like she was worried it was a stupid question, whether I'd ever seen a model I built show up in an exec meeting I wasn't invited to. I'd said something reassuring and useless. I understood now that she had been standing exactly where I was standing a year earlier, and that nobody had told her she wasn't imagining it. So I told her. We met after hours, off-site, at a coffee place near the train, because I did not want this conversation on a company calendar. I brought the metadata. She brought something I hadn't thought to look for, her own drafts, saved to her personal drive, dated, the raw model with her fingerprints all over it, weeks before it appeared upstairs as part of what Mark called my team's cost reduction work. My team's, not Priya's, his team's. That was the evening the separate incidents stopped being incidents. Laid side by side, my coastal file, Priya's vendor model, the departed contractor's study, they weren't three coincidences. They were one method, repeated. Someone builds. Mark repackages. The names get generalized away. Operations leadership, my team, our analysis, always in the last edit, always right before the file reaches an executive who could reward it. Each one, alone, was deniable. That was the point. That was what made it work. What unsettled me most wasn't the theft of any single file. It was the realization, sitting there with three histories open on my screen, that this was not only happening to me. I'd spent a week quietly nursing the private insult of the coastal deck, as if I were the story. I wasn't. I was one entry in a practice that had been running for at least 2 years, across people who had no idea they were in it, some of whom had already left the company still believing their best work simply hadn't been noticed. It had been noticed. It had just been renamed on the way up. And then I found the document that told me why he needed it to work. It was in a committee folder Mark had shared, and, I think, forgotten was visible to more than the committee. His promotion packet. The case for elevating Mark Delgado to Director of Operations. I don't enjoy admitting that I read it, but I'm not sorry I did. It cited, by name, the Q3 coastal turnaround analysis he led. It cited a consistent track record of leadership-level analytical impact. It listed, as evidence of his readiness to lead, a body of work that had been built, almost line for line, by people whose names had been deleted from it in the final edit. The packet even had a section titled Representative Work Product, and under it, 3 bullet points. I recognized all 3. One was coastal. One was Priya's vendor model. One was the departed contractor's distribution study. 3 people's late nights, condensed into 3 tidy lines of evidence for one man's readiness to lead, with not one of the 3 names anywhere on the page. The credit wasn't vanity. I've been thinking about it as ego, as a man who liked applause. It was simpler and colder than that. The credit was currency. He was spending our work to buy a title. That was the moment anger actually arrived. Not the hot kind, the useful kind, the kind that finally makes you understand the stakes. This was not about my feelings being hurt at an all-hands. This was careers, plural, being quietly converted into one man's promotion. Prius, the contractors, Mine. And I made myself stop before I did anything and answer one honest question, because I've watched too many people torch their credibility by skipping it. Why would a competent manager, and Mark was competent, do this? I found the answer, and I didn't like how much sense it made. Mark's own director had told him, more than once, in performance conversations that a colleague later described to me almost word for word, individual contributor work doesn't count at your level. I need to see leadership impact. The system Mark was climbing did not reward a manager who said my analyst found this. It rewarded a manager who owned an outcome. Credit that stayed with the person who did the work was, in the machine's eyes, a manager failing to lead. So Mark did the thing the machine was quietly asking him to do. He made the work his. Here is the sentence I finally let myself say, alone in my calm voice, because it was the truest thing I'd figured out. Any one of those generalized bylines could be explained on its own, but together they were a system for turning other people's work into one man's promotion case. That was the pattern. Naming it once was enough. I didn't need to say it twice. Understanding it did not excuse it. A pressure to take credit is not the same as taking it. Plenty of managers here show leadership impact and respond by making their people more visible, not less. Mark chose the other road, deliberately name by name, but understanding it did tell me something important. This was not only a Mark problem, And if I aimed the whole thing at Mark, the machine would replace him and keep running. So I decided where to take it, and it wasn't only at him. I did the unglamorous work first. I exported the document properties for all 3 files. I saved the version histories. I kept the original Coastal title slide, the one with my name still on it, next to Mark's edited version, so anyone could see the exact line that had been deleted and the exact time it happened. I pulled the 2 emails, my it's done and his my analysis, and put them in send order. I built it the way I'd build any analysis. Dated, sourced, quiet. Evidence, not accusation. A timeline a stranger could follow without me in the room talking over it. Then I called Priya and asked her a real question. Was she willing to have her name in it? Because the moment this became a document I handed to someone, it stopped being safe for either of us. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, I'm tired of pretending I didn't build my own work. So we were 2 names, not one. And before I handed it to anyone, I did the thing I still believe you owe even the person who wronged you. I gave Mark the chance to explain it to my face. I asked him for 20 minutes. I told him it was about the Coastal deck. I watched him assume it was a good conversation coming, because in his memory, the Coastal deck was a triumph. It went in stages the way these things do. First, surprise, a warm, confused, of course, what's up. Then, when I said I'd been through the file history, the first reflex, we're a team, you know that. Everything we do is a team effort. When I said that the title slide had specifically had my name removed, he moved to the second line. I never took your name off anything. And then I put the 2 versions on the table, side by side, the deleted line and the timestamp of his edit, and Mark went quiet for a long time. What he finally said was not a confession, and it was not a monologue, and I'm almost grateful for that, because it would have been easier to hate a monologue. He looked at the slide, and he said, that's just how things get presented up here. Not, I'm sorry. Not, you're right. A man rationalizing in real time, watching himself do it, and unable to stop. He tried, once, to make it about my career. I've always gone to bat for you. You know that. And I let the sentence sit in the air until we both heard how thin it was. I didn't raise my voice. I found that the quietest question in the room is usually the one people can't answer. And the question was simply, then why did you delete the name? I understood, in that silence, that the last of whatever I'd trusted about him had quietly closed, and that it wasn't hatred I felt. It was just finished. He assumed the conversation ended in his office. That's the part one remember most clearly, the way he started to stand up, relieved like we'd cleared the air. I told him it didn't end there. I told him I was taking it up with a record because the record now involved more than me and more than him. I brought the timeline to Dana Cole, the skip-level director 2 rungs above Mark, because I'd watched Dana reopen a bad number once instead of burying it, and that told me the one thing I needed to know about her. She read the whole thing without interrupting. She asked exactly 2 questions, both about dates, both answerable from the file. Then she said the sentence I'll always respect her for. This is checkable. Give me a few days. She pulled Mark's promotion packet before the committee met. Not to destroy it, to correct it. What happened after wasn't a bonfire, and I'm glad it wasn't, because a bonfire would have let everyone treat it as one bad man instead of a bad incentive. The packet was paused and rewritten to reflect who actually built the work it cited. The authorship on all 3 projects was restored in the official project records. My name back on the coastal analysis, Priya's on the vendor model, the contractors on the study. The CFO was rebriefed, quietly, on who had actually done the coastal turnaround. I don't know exactly what was said in that room, but a week later she stopped me in a hallway, held my eyes a beat longer than normal, and said, "Good work on coastal," and I understood that the record had reached her. A month after that, Dana did one more thing I hadn't asked for. When the next quarterly review went up to the executive team, she had Priya present her own vendor model. Not Mark, not a director, the analyst who built it, standing in a room where the work had always ended up without her. It was 10 minutes. Priya told me afterward that her hands shook the whole time and that she wouldn't have traded it for anything. I understood exactly what she meant. And the part that mattered most to me was the part that wasn't about me at all. Dana put in a rule: small, unglamorous, permanent. Any deck that reaches leadership has to carry the names of the people who built it. Not operations leadership. Not my team. Names. The exact thing Mark's last edit always deleted became the one thing the process now required. Mark wasn't fired. I want to be honest about that, because I know the satisfying version of this story ends with a man carrying a box to his car, and this one doesn't. His conduct was named in writing to him and to his director. His promotion didn't happen that cycle. And his director's show me leadership impact pressure, the machine underneath the man, got flagged too, which was the only outcome that would actually stop the next Mark. He's still there, quieter, no longer the only name that reaches the top of the stairs. I decided that was enough, and I meant it. The goal had never been to watch him fall. It was to make the record tell the truth. There was a cost, and I'd be lying if I pretended there wasn't. Something eased out of my working life that I don't think comes back. A certain comfort, a manager I used to trust completely, the version of the job where I didn't feel the need to check who the file said had built it. Truth has a price. I paid part of it in the quiet that now sits where that trust used to be. But months later, I stood in the back of a room again, while a new analysis went up on the screen for leadership. This time, the title slide had my name on it, in small gray letters at the bottom, prepared by, and then me. It was ordinary. Nobody applauded. And that ordinariness was the whole point, the thing I'd fought for without ever quite saying it out loud. Not applause, just accuracy. Priya's name was up there too, on her own work, a few weeks later. She doesn't ask me anymore whether she imagined it. I kept the original coastal title slide. Not the corrected records, not the version that got fixed. The first one, the one I'd sent at 11:40 that Tuesday night with my name still on it before anyone edited it away. I keep it because it's the truest document in the whole story. The work was always mine. The file always knew. It just took me 11 years and one deleted line to finally trust the record more than the applause. If you've ever watched your own work walk into a room without you, wearing someone else's name, I'd genuinely like to know what you did about it, or wish you had. I still build things for a living. I just read the properties now.